life. It isn't. An executive, in Drucker's broader sense, is anyone whose decisions and actions are responsible for producing results. That could be a company leader, a software engineer, a teacher, a student, a freelancer, a doctor, an entrepreneur, or even someone trying to organize their own life. And here's where the book becomes interesting. Drucker doesn't begin by asking you how to work harder. He doesn't tell you to wake up at 5 in the morning and fill every minute of your schedule. He doesn't tell you that successful people are simply more motivated than everyone else. Instead, he asks a much more uncomfortable question. Are you spending your limited resources on the things that actually matter? Because imagine giving two people the same 24 hours. One person spends the entire day reacting. The phone rings, they answer. An email arrives, they respond. Someone makes a request, they immediately say yes. A meeting appears on the calendar, they attend. Another task appears, they switch. At night, they feel exhausted because they were constantly doing something. The second person behaves differently. They don't necessarily work more hours. Instead, they decide what matters before the day starts. They protect their attention. They refuse unnecessary commitments. They concentrate on work that creates meaningful results. At the end of the day, they may have done fewer things, but they may have accomplished far more. That's the paradox. Doing more doesn't automatically mean achieving more. And once you understand this, you begin looking at productivity differently. Let's imagine a college student named Rohan. Rohan wants a good software job. Every day, he studies for 6 hours. At least that's what he tells himself. He watches programming tutorials. He reads articles. He saves useful resources. He joins study groups. He makes enormous to-do lists. He even watches videos about how to study better. But after several months, something is wrong. He still struggles to solve programming problems on his own. Why? Because most of his effort has gone into consuming information rather than developing the ability to use it. Now imagine another student, Maya. She studies for 3 focused hours. She spends part of that time learning a concept. Then she closes the tutorial. She tries to solve problems without help. She gets stuck. She analyzes her mistakes. She repeats the process. After several months, Maya may know less theory than Rohan. But she can actually perform. Who is more effective? The answer has nothing to do with who studied longer. It depends on the result. And that brings us to the first major idea. Effectiveness is about results, not activity. This sounds obvious, but look at how people describe their days. I worked for 10 hours. I answered hundreds of emails. I attended 5 meetings. I studied all afternoon. I was extremely busy. Notice something. Almost every statement describes activity. Very few describe outcomes. Imagine a salesperson saying, I made 80 calls today. That sounds impressive. But what if none of those calls created a useful conversation? Now imagine another salesperson who made 20 calls but found 3 serious customers. The second person created more value with less activity. The same principle works everywhere. A programmer doesn't create value simply by typing code. A teacher doesn't create value simply by speaking for 6 hours. A manager doesn't create value simply by attending meetings. A student doesn't create value simply by sitting beside a textbook. The important question is always, what changed because of what I did? That question is powerful because it forces you to connect effort with consequence. And once you start asking it, you may discover something uncomfortable. Some of the things keeping you busy aren't actually important. You might spend an hour organizing your notes when you should be solving problems. You might spend half the morning answering messages that could have waited. You might attend meetings where nothing is decided. You might constantly improve tiny details while ignoring the one major issue that is holding everything back. This is where effectiveness begins. Not with adding another productivity app. Not with creating a prettier schedule. Not with finding the perfect morning routine. It begins with deciding what deserves your attention. And that leads to the first resource you need to understand. Time. Think about money. If someone gave you 10,000 rupees and told you that you had to account for every rupee, you would probably pay attention. You would know where it went. But time is even more valuable. Because if you waste money, you might earn it again. If you waste an hour, you can never buy that hour back. Yesterday cannot be negotiated with. You cannot call yesterday and say, Give me another 2 hours. I'll use them properly this time. It's gone. Yet most people manage money more carefully than they manage time. They check their bank balance. They compare prices. They think before spending. But they rarely examine where their hours disappear. And that's dangerous. Because time doesn't usually disappear in one giant mistake. It disappears quietly. 5 minutes checking a notification. 10 minutes scrolling. 15 minutes waiting for a meeting to begin. 20 minutes switching between tasks. Another 20 minutes trying to remember what you were doing before the interruption. None of these moments feels catastrophic. But add them together. Now multiply them by 7 days. Then 52 weeks. Suddenly, you aren't losing minutes. You're losing weeks of your life. So here's a simple experiment. For the next few days, don't try to become more productive. Just observe yourself. Write down what you actually do. Not what you plan to do. What you really did. You may discover that your biggest problem isn't a lack of time. It's a lack of awareness about where your time is going. And once you see the leaks, you can begin closing them. Maybe you discover that your phone steals an hour every evening. Maybe unnecessary meetings consume the best hours of your working day. Maybe you repeatedly perform tasks that someone else could handle. Maybe you're spending your most energetic hours on low-value work and leaving your most important task for the time when your brain is already exhausted. That last mistake is incredibly common. People often give their best energy to whatever appears first. But the first thing on your schedule isn't necessarily the most important thing in your life. Your inbox doesn't know your priorities. Other people's requests don't automatically deserve your best attention. Urgency and importance are not the same thing. Something can be urgent because someone else wants it immediately. That doesn't mean it matters most. Your most important work may be completely silent. Studying for an examination doesn't send notifications. Building a skill doesn't demand an instant response. Writing a business plan doesn't buzz in your pocket. Preparing for an interview doesn't usually feel urgent at 10 a.m. But those quiet activities may have a much greater effect on your future. This is why effective people learn to protect blocks of uninterrupted attention. If something important requires deep thinking, give it space. Don't try to build something meaningful while constantly switching between 10 distractions. Your brain pays a price every time you change direction. And sometimes the best productivity technique is surprisingly simple. Do one important thing long enough to finish meaningful progress. But there is another trap. Even if you understand your priorities, people will continue asking for your time. A colleague wants help. A friend needs a favor. A new opportunity appears. Another project sounds exciting. Someone says, "Can you just handle this one small thing?" And because you want to be helpful, you say yes. Then another yes. Then another. Eventually your calendar is full of commitments that weren't part of your original plan. This is why effectiveness requires the courage to say no. Not because other people don't matter. Because your priorities matter too. Every yes has a cost. If you say yes to an unnecessary task, you're saying no to something else. Saying no to sleep. Maybe you're saying no to your family. Maybe you're saying no to learning. Maybe you're saying no to the project that could change your career. You don't feel the cost immediately. That's what makes it dangerous. The consequences appear later. So before accepting another commitment, ask, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? That single question can save you enormous amounts of time. And it leads to an even deeper idea. Effective people don't simply manage their schedules. They manage their choices. Because ultimately, your life is shaped by what you repeatedly choose to give your attention to. And there is something else you need to understand. You will never become effective by trying to become excellent at everything. You have strengths. You also have weaknesses. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is spending their entire lives trying to repair every weakness while barely developing what they're already naturally good at. Think about a basketball team. You wouldn't take your best shooter and tell him to spend most of the season becoming an average defender if his greatest contribution comes from scoring. You would understand what he does exceptionally well and place him where that strength matters. Your career deserves the same thinking. Maybe you are naturally good at explaining things. Maybe you're excellent at solving technical problems. Maybe you understand people. Maybe you're unusually disciplined. Maybe you're creative. Maybe you can see patterns that other people miss. Your responsibility is to discover where your strengths can produce the greatest results. And here's the fascinating part. You may not know your strengths as well as you think you do. Sometimes the best way to discover them is to study your own results. Look back at important decisions you've made. What did you expect to happen? What actually happened? Where were you consistently right? Where were you consistently wrong? Over time, patterns begin to appear. Perhaps you're much better at planning than you realized. Perhaps you're excellent at negotiation. Perhaps you are unusually good at simplifying complicated problems. Those patterns are clues. And once you discover a strength, don't merely admire it. Develop it. Use it. Build opportunities around it. Because effectiveness doesn't come from becoming average at everything. It comes from making your strongest abilities useful. And that brings us to one of the most difficult questions you can ask yourself. What should I stop doing? Most people ask, what should I add? A new course, a new habit, a new app, a new project, a new goal. Effective people also ask, what can I eliminate? Because you cannot keep adding things forever. Eventually, something has to go. An old commitment, a pointless meeting, a project that no longer matters, a habit that consumes your attention, a goal you no longer genuinely want. Sometimes progress doesn't require adding another step. Sometimes it requires removing one. And this is where the difference between an ordinary life and an effective life can become surprisingly small. One person keeps saying yes. The other chooses carefully. One reacts to everything. The other protects attention. One measures effort. The other measures results. One tries to fix every weakness. The other builds around strengths. One keeps everything on the plate. The other asks what can be removed. And slowly, those choices compound. That is what effectiveness really is. Not one magical productivity trick. Not a perfect schedule. Not working until you're exhausted. It is the repeated discipline of deciding what matters and directing your limited resources toward it. And once you understand that, the next challenge becomes unavoidable. How do you decide what matters most when everything seems important? That is where priorities, focus, and difficult decisions enter the picture. And that may be the point where the difference between a busy person and an effective person becomes impossible to ignore. Imagine you have 10 tasks in front of you. All 10 appear important. All 10 are asking for your attention. All 10 could probably be justified. So what do? You try to do all 10. And that sounds responsible, but it can actually be one of the fastest ways to become ineffective. Because your attention is not unlimited. Your energy is not unlimited. And your ability to make good decisions isn't unlimited either. When you divide yourself across too many priorities, something predictable happens. Nothing receives your best effort. You become a little busy with everything and truly effective at almost nothing. This is why prioritization is much more than arranging a list from number 1 to number 10. Real prioritization means deciding what deserves your best resources and what doesn't. And sometimes that decision is uncomfortable. Because choosing one priority means deliberately allowing something else to wait. Think about a university student preparing for several exams. Suppose the student has 5 subjects. There are only 10 days left. Instead of identifying the subjects where improvement would make the biggest difference, the student spends exactly the same amount of time on every subject. 2 hours here, 2 hours there, 2 hours somewhere else. It feels fair, but fairness isn't necessarily effectiveness. Perhaps the student is already excellent in 2 subjects. Maybe one subject is almost impossible to fail. But there is another subject where a few focused hours could move the student from a failing grade to a strong one. Equal effort across everything may feel balanced. Unequal effort based on importance may produce a much better result. This is the mindset shift. Don't distribute your effort equally. Distribute it intelligently. And that requires knowing what your highest value work actually is. Ask yourself, if I could accomplish only one meaningful thing today, what would make the biggest difference? Not 10 things. 1. That question forces clarity, and once you've answered it, protect that task. Don't let minor responsibilities steal the time that belongs to major responsibilities. This is particularly important because modern life constantly tries to convince you that everything is urgent. Your phone wants your attention. Your inbox wants your attention. Social media wants your attention. Other people's schedules want your attention. But the fact that something is asking for attention doesn't mean it deserves attention. Your job is to decide. And sometimes the best decision is to postpone something. Sometimes it is to delegate it. Sometimes it is to simplify it. And sometimes it is to eliminate it completely. That last option is particularly powerful. Because there are things in your life that once made sense but no longer do. Maybe you started a project because it looked promising. 6 months later, the situation has changed. Maybe you took on a responsibility because you wanted to help. Now it consumes hours every week without creating meaningful value. Maybe you developed a habit during a completely different phase of your life, but you've continued it simply because you've never stopped to question it. Effectiveness requires periodic reassessment. You have to be willing to say, "This made sense before. It doesn't make sense anymore." That isn't failure. That's adaptation. Imagine a company continuing to manufacture a product nobody wants simply because the company has already spent millions developing it. The money is gone whether they continue or stop. The important question is not, how much have we already invested? The important question is, does continuing make sense from this point forward? The same principle can apply to your time. Maybe you've spent 6 months learning a particular skill, but you discover that it isn't relevant to the career you actually want. That doesn't mean those 6 months were worthless. You learned something. You gained experience. But you shouldn't automatically spend another year simply because you've already spent 6 months. Past effort should inform your decision. It shouldn't control your future. This is one reason effective people periodically ask themselves, "What should I stop doing?" It's a surprisingly powerful question. Because every activity has an opportunity cost. Every hour spent on one thing is an hour unavailable for another. And if you never remove old commitments, new priorities have nowhere to go. Now think about a manager. Her team has 20 ongoing initiatives. Every initiative sounds valuable, but the team is exhausted. Deadlines keep slipping. People are constantly switching between projects. Quality is declining. The manager could respond by telling everyone to work harder. But that's not necessarily leadership. A more effective response might be to ask, which of these projects truly matter? Perhaps 5 are critical, 8 are useful but can wait, and 7 were started without a clear reason. Eliminate the 7. Pause the 8. Concentrate the team on the 5 that matter. Suddenly, productivity may improve without anyone working an extra hour. Why? Because the problem wasn't effort. The problem was concentration. And this idea applies to personal life too. You might have 20 goals. Get fit. Learn programming. Start a business. Read 50 books. Learn a language. Prepare for exams. Build a YouTube channel. Travel more. Spend more time with family. Save money. And become an expert in 5 different fields. Every goal sounds good, but trying to pursue all of them simultaneously can leave you permanently dissatisfied. You are always behind, always switching, always starting, rarely finishing. Effectiveness asks you to make choices. Which goal matters most right now? What season of life are you in? What deserves your attention today? That doesn't mean abandoning every other forever. It means recognizing that priorities can change over time. There may be a season for learning, a season for building, a season for earning, a season for family, a season for recovery. The mistake is expecting everything to receive equal attention at the same time. Life doesn't work that way. Now let's move to another major challenge. Making decisions. Every day, you make dozens of decisions. Most are insignificant. What should I eat? When should I reply? Which video should I watch? What should I buy? But some decisions have consequences that last years. Which career should I pursue? Should I accept this opportunity? Should I start this business? Should I hire this person? Should I leave this project? Should I invest my time in this skill? Those decisions deserve a different level of thinking. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is confusing information with understanding. You can collect hundreds of facts and still make a terrible decision. Why? Because information doesn't automatically tell you what matters. Imagine you're running an online store and sales suddenly fall. You collect data, thousands of numbers, website visits, customer demographics, ad impressions, click-through rates, refunds, conversion rates, average order value. You now have enormous amounts of information. But you still don't know the problem. The real question is, what changed? Maybe website traffic dropped. Maybe customers are visiting but not purchasing. Maybe the product has developed quality problems. Maybe a competitor has undercut your price. Maybe customers have moved to another platform. The data becomes useful only when it helps you identify the actual issue. So effective decision-making begins with defining the problem correctly. Before asking, "What's the solution?" ask, "What exactly are we trying to solve?" This distinction can save you from wasting enormous amounts of effort. Consider a student who keeps getting low marks in mathematics. The student decides, "I need to study more." So they study for 4 hours every day. But the marks barely improve. Why? Maybe the problem isn't insufficient study time. Maybe the student doesn't understand the fundamental concepts. Maybe they are practicing the wrong types of questions. Maybe they read solutions instead of attempting problems independently. Maybe exam anxiety causes them to perform poorly under pressure. The solution depends on the problem. If you diagnose the wrong problem, even enormous effort can produce disappointing results. That's why clarity comes before action. Once the problem is clearly understood, look at your alternatives. Don't immediately fall in love with the first solution that comes to mind. Ask, what else could we do? What happens if we do nothing? What are the risks? What assumptions are we making? What would have to be true for this option to work? This last question is especially useful. Suppose you want to start a business because you believe people will pay for your product. That's an assumption. You could spend a year building the product. Or you could test the assumption first. Talk to potential customers. Create a simple prototype. Offer a basic version. Observe what people actually do. Reality can teach you more than imagination. This is why effective decision-making often involves experimentation. You don't need perfect certainty. You need enough understanding to make a responsible choice. And then comes the part many people avoid: commitment. Once you've made the decision, act. Some people remain trapped in analysis forever. They research, compare, ask opinions, watch videos, read reviews, create spreadsheets, and eventually they have so much information that making a decision becomes even harder. Analysis is useful until it stops improving the decision. After that point, more analysis becomes another form of procrastination. You eventually have to choose. And when you choose, accept responsibility. Don't hide behind the group. Don't say, "Everyone else wanted this." If you have responsibility for the outcome, you need to own the decision. That doesn't mean you have to make every decision alone. In fact, good decision makers actively seek different perspectives. If you're considering an important career move, talk to someone who has experience. If you're launching a product, speak to customers. If you're solving a technical problem, ask someone who understands the system. Other people can reveal blind spots. But listening to advice doesn't mean surrendering responsibility. Someone else's confidence cannot replace your judgment. And someone else's fear shouldn't automatically become yours. Gather perspectives. Challenge your assumptions. Then decide. And after the decision, watch what happens. This is where feedback becomes incredibly valuable. Suppose you decide to change your study strategy. You begin practicing questions instead of simply reading notes. After 4 weeks, you take a test. Your score improves significantly. That result tells you something. The method appears to be working. Now suppose the score doesn't improve. That also tells you something. Maybe the method isn't enough. Maybe the problem lies somewhere else. Either way, the result is information. The mistake is to treat every result emotionally. If something succeeds, don't simply celebrate. Understand why it succeeded. If something fails, don't simply feel disappointed. Understand why it failed. Results are feedback. They are telling you something about reality. And reality is often a better teacher than our assumptions. This principle is especially important when you are wrong. Because nobody makes perfect decisions. The goal isn't to eliminate mistakes. That's impossible. The goal is to make mistakes informative. Imagine 2 entrepreneurs. The first launches a product that fails. He becomes embarrassed. He blames the market. He stops thinking about it. The second launches a product that fails. She asks, which assumption was wrong? She discovers that customers liked the concept but didn't consider it worth paying for. Now she knows something she didn't know before. She changes the offer, tests again. The first entrepreneur experienced failure. The second gained information. The event was similar. The response was different, and that difference can determine who eventually succeeds. But there is another danger. Sometimes people become attached to their decisions. They think changing direction means admitting that they were wrong. So they keep defending a strategy even when evidence is piling up against it. This is where ego becomes expensive. Imagine you've spent months building a marketing campaign. The numbers are poor, customer feedback is negative, the conversion rate is falling. But you keep saying, give it more time. Maybe more time is actually needed. But maybe you're simply protecting your original decision. An effective person asks, if I were making this decision today, knowing what I know now, would I still choose the same path? That's a powerful question, because it separates the future decision from the emotional attachment to the past. If the answer is no, changing direction isn't weakness. It's learning. The world changes, markets change, technology changes, people change, your own goals change. A strategy that was correct yesterday can become wrong tomorrow. Effectiveness requires the courage to recognize that. And this brings us back to the central idea. The effective person isn't the person who is always right. It is the person who creates results by continually learning, adjusting, and focusing on what matters. They know their time is limited. They know their attention is valuable. They know their strengths are more useful than endless attempts at perfection. They know priorities require sacrifice. They know decisions require responsibility. And they understand that results provide feedback. When you put all of these ideas together, productivity starts to look very different. It isn't about squeezing another 30 minutes out of your day. It isn't about creating the world's most complicated schedule. It isn't about turning yourself into a machine. It's about asking better questions. Where should my time go? What contribution am I responsible for? Where are my strengths? What deserves priority? What should I stop doing? What decision needs to be made? And what can I learn from the result? Those questions can change the way you work. But they can also change the way you see your entire life. Because eventually, you realize something. You don't have unlimited time to become everything you could possibly become. You have to choose, and the quality of those choices determines what your limited time becomes. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by everything you have to do, don't immediately ask, how can I fit more into my day? Pause. Ask a better question. What can I remove? Then ask, what deserves my best? Because effectiveness isn't about carrying the largest load. It's about carrying the right one. There is another side of effectiveness that is easy to underestimate. It isn't just about managing your own time. It is about making the people around you more effective too. Because sooner or later, almost everyone reaches a point where individual effort is no longer enough. You may become responsible for a team. You may lead a project. You may work with clients. You may become a parent. You may start a business. And suddenly, your results depend partly on other people. At that point, a completely different question appears. How can I help other people perform at their best? The natural temptation is to focus on people's weaknesses. You notice who is slow, who makes mistakes, who communicates, who needs constant supervision, and you start thinking about how to fix them. But there's a better starting point. Look for strengths. Imagine you have a team of 4 people. One person is exceptionally good at technical problem solving. Another is brilliant at communicating with customers. A third is highly organized and naturally good at coordinating people. The fourth is creative and constantly finds unusual solutions. If you try to make all 4 people behave exactly the same way, you're wasting their potential. The goal of a strong leader isn't to create 4 identical employees. It's to create a team where different strengths combine to produce something greater. This is why putting people in the right roles matters so much. Imagine asking your best programmer to spend most of their time doing administrative work. Or asking your most persuasive communicator to spend their entire day working alone with spreadsheets. They might still perform, but you're not getting the best possible contribution from them. Effectiveness means asking, where can this person's ability create the greatest value? And there's an important lesson here for your own life. Sometimes you aren't failing because you lack ability. You may simply be operating in the wrong environment. A person who feels average in one situation can become exceptional in another. Think about someone who struggles in a traditional classroom but becomes outstanding when working on real-world projects. Or someone who hates repetitive administrative work but becomes incredibly productive when solving complex problems. Or someone who isn't comfortable speaking in front of large groups but is an exceptional writer. The mistake is assuming that one environment can accurately measure the full potential of a person. Strengths often become visible when the right challenge meets the right ability. But strengths alone aren't enough. They have to be connected to responsibility. If you know you're good at something, ask, where can I use this strength to create a meaningful result? Because a strength that produces no value is simply potential. And potential is not the same as performance. This brings us back to contribution. An effective person doesn't constantly ask, what do I want to do? They also ask, what does the situation need from me? That distinction is important. Imagine you're part of a team preparing to launch a product. You personally love brainstorming new features. You could spend hours generating ideas. But the product is already overloaded with features. The real problem is that customers can't understand how to use it. In that situation, creating 10 more features may be enjoyable, but improving the user experience may be far more valuable. The effective question isn't, what am I good at? It's, how can what I'm good at solve the problem that actually matters? That's where strength and contribution meet. And once you start thinking this way, you begin to understand something about leadership. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It is about creating conditions where useful work can happen. A manager who constantly interrupts employees may believe they are being involved, but they may actually be destroying concentration. A leader who changes priorities every few days may think they are being flexible, but the team may simply feel confused. A person who insists on approving every tiny decision may think they are maintaining quality, but they may be creating a bottleneck. Effectiveness requires knowing when to step in and when to step back. This is another reason priorities matter. If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Your team needs clarity. They need to know, what are we trying to accomplish? What matters most? What can wait? What does success look like? Without those answers, people can work extremely hard and still move in different directions. Imagine 4 people rowing a boat. Every person may be rowing with tremendous effort, but if they aren't coordinated, the boat may barely move. Effort without direction creates exhaustion. Direction turns effort into progress. This is true for individuals as well. You can spend months working hard toward a goal without getting closer if the goal itself is poorly defined. So before increasing your effort, examine your direction. Ask, am I climbing the right mountain? Because becoming more efficient at climbing the wrong mountain is not success. It's simply faster failure. This is why effective people periodically step away from the daily rush. They look at the larger picture. They ask, what am I actually trying to accomplish? What has changed? Does my current work still support that goal? Is there something more important I should be doing? These questions create something that busy people rarely have: perspective. And perspective becomes increasingly important as your responsibilities grow. When you have one responsibility, your decisions are relatively simple. When you have 10, things become more complicated. You need principles. You need priorities. You need a way to decide what deserves your attention. Otherwise, every new problem becomes an emergency. And if you live in permanent emergency mode, you never have enough time to work on the things that prevent future emergencies. This creates a vicious cycle. You spend your day solving small problems. Because you're solving small problems, you don't have time to fix the larger system. Because the larger system isn't fixed, more small problems appear tomorrow. And tomorrow, you solve them again. Effective people try to break that cycle. They don't only ask, what problem is in front of me? They ask, why does this problem keep appearing? That question can reveal a much deeper issue. Suppose a manager receives the same report every week showing that customers are waiting too long for support. The manager could simply tell the support team, respond faster. That may help temporarily, but an effective manager might investigate the system. Why are so many requests reaching the support team? Is the product confusing? Are instructions unclear? Is the website creating unnecessary problems? Is there a technical issue causing repeated complaints? The goal isn't simply to make people work harder. The goal is to improve the system producing the result. This is an important distinction. Sometimes the solution to poor performance is more effort, but sometimes the solution is better design. And if you always respond to problems by demanding more effort, you may eventually exhaust everyone without fixing anything. Now think about your own life. If you're constantly late, the solution may not be, try harder to be punctual. Maybe you're consistently underestimating how long things take. If you constantly miss deadlines, the problem may not be laziness. Maybe you're accepting too many commitments. If you're always tired, the solution may not be another productivity hack. Maybe your schedule is fundamentally overloaded. If you constantly feel distracted, the answer may not be more motivation. Maybe your environment is designed to interrupt you. Effective thinking looks beneath the surface. It searches for causes. And this is another reason feedback is so important. You need evidence about what is actually happening, not just what you believe is happening. Because human beings are excellent at creating stories about themselves. I work well under pressure. I don't have enough time. I'm just bad at concentrating. I'm not good with people. I'm not a morning person. I'm naturally disorganized. These statements can become identities. And once they become identities, we stop questioning them. But what if they are incomplete? What if you're not bad at concentrating? What if you've simply never learned to protect your attention? What if you're not disorganized? What if you have too many simultaneous commitments? What if you're not bad with people? What if you're in an environment that constantly puts you in situations that don't match your strengths? Feedback helps separate reality from assumptions. Instead of saying, I'm bad at this, ask, what happened? Instead of saying, I'm not capable, ask, what specifically went wrong? Instead of saying, I always fail, ask, which part failed? Precision makes improvement possible, and this is why effective people don't treat feedback as criticism. They treat it as information. Sometimes the information is uncomfortable, but uncomfortable information can be extremely valuable. Imagine you give a presentation and several people struggle to understand your explanation. You could become defensive. Those people weren't paying attention. Or you could become curious. Which part wasn't clear? The second response creates an opportunity to improve. The same applies to your work. If your manager repeatedly asks you to simplify your reports, don't automatically assume they don't appreciate your work. Maybe your reports contain too much information and not enough clarity. If customers repeatedly ask the same question, perhaps your product instructions need improvement. If students repeatedly make the same mistake, perhaps the explanation needs to change. Repeated problems are often signals. Learn to listen to them. And there's another powerful principle here. Don't confuse intelligence with effectiveness. A person can be extremely intelligent and still be ineffective. They may understand complicated theories. They may know enormous amounts of information. They may win arguments. But if they cannot convert knowledge into useful results, their intelligence remains underutilized. Meanwhile, someone with average academic ability may become extraordinarily effective because they know how to focus, decide, communicate, and execute. Knowledge matters, but knowledge needs direction. Think about a navigation system. You can have the most sophisticated navigation technology in the world, but if the destination is wrong, better navigation won't help. Your mind works the same way. Optimize your schedule. Improve your memory. Learn faster. Read more. Work longer. But if you are pursuing the wrong objective, all that improvement simply makes you more efficient at moving in the wrong direction. That's why effectiveness starts with purpose. What result are you trying to create? Why does it matter? Who benefits from it? What would success actually look like? Without those answers, productivity becomes an empty game. You start measuring yourself by how much you did instead of whether what you did mattered. And this is one reason people can become addicted to checklists. Checking something off feels good. It creates a tiny sense of achievement. But a completed task isn't necessarily an important result. You can complete 50 tasks and still fail to accomplish the one thing that mattered most. So don't worship the checklist. Use it as a tool. The destination matters more than the number of boxes you check. Now, there's another habit that can dramatically improve effectiveness. Reflection. Not endless overthinking. Reflection. At the end of a day or week, ask yourself, what worked? What didn't? Where did my time go? What created the most value? What should I repeat? What should I stop? These questions turn experience into learning. Without reflection, you can repeat the same mistakes for years. You can become extremely experienced at doing something badly. Experience alone doesn't guarantee improvement. Experience plus reflection creates learning. Imagine two people who have been working in the same field for 10 years. One has effectively repeated the same year 10 times. The other has spent 10 years observing results, experimenting, learning, adjusting, and improving. They both have 10 years of experience on paper. But their actual capabilities may be completely different. The difference is deliberate learning. And deliberate learning doesn't require hours of journaling. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. At the end of a difficult day, simply ask, what should I do differently tomorrow? That's enough to begin. Over time, these small reflections become a personal operating system. You start noticing patterns. You discover what drains your energy. You discover what creates momentum. You discover when you're most focused. You discover which commitments are worth accepting. You discover which people bring out your best work. You discover which environments destroy your attention. And eventually, you stop relying entirely on motivation. You begin designing your life around what you have learned about yourself. This is where effectiveness becomes personal. There is no universal schedule that works perfectly for everyone. One person may do their best thinking early in the morning. Another may become more creative late at night. One person may work best in complete silence. Another may need some background activity. One person may need long uninterrupted blocks. Another may work effectively in shorter bursts. The principle isn't, follow this exact routine. The principle is, understand how you work, then deliberately arrange your environment around meaningful results. You become your own experiment. Test, observe, adjust, repeat, and there is something deeply liberating about that. You don't need to copy another person's life. You need to understand your own. You don't need someone else's perfect morning routine. You need to know when your mind performs best. You don't need someone else's definition of success. You need to know what results actually matter to you. But remember something important. Understanding yourself is only the beginning. Effectiveness ultimately requires action. You can spend months learning about productivity. You can watch hundreds of videos. You can read dozens of books. You can create beautiful plans. But if nothing changes in your behavior, nothing changes in your results. Knowledge becomes valuable when it changes what you do. So perhaps the best way to use these ideas is to choose one. Just one. Tonight, look at your calendar. Find one activity that consumes time without producing meaningful value. Remove it. Tomorrow, identify the single most important result you need to create. Protect time for it. This week, identify one strength you can deliberately develop. This month, review one important decision and compare what you expected with what actually happened. These are small actions, but effectiveness is built from small actions repeated consistently. And eventually, those actions create something much larger. They create trust. People begin to trust you because you deliver. They create confidence. You trust yourself because you keep your commitments. They create clarity. You know what deserves your attention. And they create freedom. Because when you stop wasting energy on things that don't matter, you have more energy available for the things that do. That may be one of the greatest rewards of becoming effective. Not simply accomplishing more, but having more control over where your life is going. Because think about what happens when you're ineffective. Your schedule controls you. Other people's priorities control you. Your notifications control you. Your unfinished tasks control you. Your impulses control you. You wake up reacting. You spend the day reacting. And you go to sleep feeling like the day happened to you. Effectiveness creates the opposite experience. You decide. You choose. You prioritize. You act. You review. You adjust. You become an active participant in your own direction. And that is a much bigger idea than productivity. It is personal responsibility. You may not control every circumstance, but you can control your response. You may not control how much time you have in total, but you can influence how you use the time you have. You may not control every opportunity that appears, but you can choose which opportunities deserve your attention. You may not control every result, but you can control whether you learn from the result. And that is where effectiveness becomes a lifelong discipline rather than a temporary productivity technique. You don't become effective once. You practice effectiveness every day. You decide what matters. You concentrate. You act. You learn. Then you decide again. And perhaps the most surprising part is that the person who becomes effective often doesn't look dramatically different from the outside. They may still have busy days. They may still make mistakes. They may still get interrupted. They may still feel overwhelmed sometimes. The difference is that they know how to return to what matters. They know how to say no. They know when to stop. They know where their strengths lie. They know what results they are responsible for. And when things go wrong, they don't waste all their energy defending themselves. They learn. They adjust. They continue. That is what makes effectiveness powerful. It doesn't promise a life without problems. It gives you a better way to deal with them. And once you begin thinking this way, you may notice something else. The greatest threat to your future isn't always failure. Sometimes it is success at the wrong things. You can become incredibly efficient at something that doesn't matter. You can build a career you don't actually want. You can become excellent at meeting expectations that were never yours. You can spend years climbing a ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. That's why effectiveness needs direction. Before asking how efficiently you can do something, ask whether it deserves to be done at all. Before asking how quickly you can reach a goal, ask whether the goal is worth reaching. Before asking how much more you can accomplish, ask what you should remove. Because your life is not an unlimited container waiting to be filled. It is a limited amount of time. And what you put into that time becomes your life. So choose carefully, work deliberately, use your strengths, protect your attention, make decisions, learn from reality, and above everything else, remember this. Being busy can make you tired. Being effective can make your effort count. The real challenge, then, is not learning another productivity trick. It is deciding what kind of person you want to become with the limited time you have. Because every day, whether you realize it or not, you are making that decision. When you choose what deserves your attention, you're shaping your future. When you decide what to ignore, you're shaping your future. When you choose which strengths to develop, you're shaping your future. When you decide which commitments to accept and which ones to reject, you're shaping your future. And when you repeatedly choose meaningful work over meaningless activity, something begins to happen. Your days start becoming more intentional. Your work starts becoming more valuable. And slowly, your life starts moving in a direction you actually chose. This is why the ideas behind effectiveness are much deeper than simply getting more done. The real goal isn't to squeeze every possible task into your schedule. The goal is to make sure the things occupying your schedule deserve to be there. Imagine looking at your life 10 years from now. You could spend those 10 years constantly reacting. Reacting to messages. Reacting to other people's expectations. Reacting to emergencies. Reacting to whatever happens to appear in front of you. Or you could spend those same 10 years deliberately building something. A valuable skill. A meaningful career. A strong relationship. A business. A body you're proud of. A reputation for reliability. A mind capable of solving difficult problems. The amount of time is the same. What changes is the direction. And direction comes from choices. So perhaps the most useful exercise you can do after listening to all of this is extremely simple. Take a blank piece of paper. Write down everything currently demanding your time. Your work, your studies, your projects, your commitments, your habits, your responsibilities. Then look at the list without trying to justify anything. Ask yourself, which of these actually creates value? Which of these genuinely moves me towards something important? Which of these could disappear without causing a serious problem? Which of these should someone else handle? And finally, what deserves more of my attention? You may be surprised by what you discover. You might realize that something you've considered a major responsibility is actually optional. You might discover that a small activity is producing a surprisingly large result. You might notice that your most important goal has been receiving your leftover energy instead of your best energy. And you might finally see why you have felt busy but strangely unfulfilled. You weren't necessarily doing too little. You may simply have been investing too much of yourself in the wrong places. That's an important realization, because once you know where the problem is, you can change it. You can eliminate, you can delegate, you can simplify, you can concentrate, you can say no, you can redirect your energy. And perhaps most importantly, you can begin measuring yourself differently. Instead of asking, how much did I do today? Ask, what meaningful result did my effort create? Instead of, how many hours did I work? Ask, did those hours move something important forward? Instead of, how many tasks did I complete? Ask, did I complete the right task? Instead of, why can't I do everything? Ask, what actually deserves to be done? These questions seem small, but better questions often produce better decisions. And better decisions repeated over time produce better results. That's the heart of effectiveness. Not perfection, not constant motivation, not endless discipline. Better decisions, repeated consistently. Of course, there will still be days when you fail. There will be mornings when you waste time. There will be projects that don't work. There will be decisions you regret. There will be goals you abandon. There will be people who disappoint you. There will be circumstances you cannot control. Effectiveness doesn't eliminate these things. It changes what you do next. You look at the result. You learn. You adjust. You continue. You don't spend your entire life trying to prove that your previous decision was correct. You care more about making the next decision better. That mindset can save you years. Because life is too short to keep defending a direction simply because you've already spent time walking in it. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is, "I've learned enough to know this isn't working." And then you change. That's not giving up. That's using information. The same applies to your strengths. You may discover that you're not meant to excel at everything. You may discover that certain environments consistently bring out your worst performance. You may discover that another person is better suited to a responsibility you have been trying to handle yourself. That's okay. You don't have to personally control everything. You don't have to personally master everything. You don't even have to personally solve every problem. Sometimes effectiveness means finding the right person. Sometimes it means creating the right system. Sometimes it means removing the problem entirely. And sometimes it means admitting that your original approach was wrong. The more comfortable you become with these ideas, the less energy you waste protecting your ego. You become more interested in results than appearances. You stop needing to look busy. You start caring about being useful. You stop trying to impress people with how much you can handle. You start asking whether what you're handling actually matters. And that shift can transform your career. Because organizations don't ultimately need people who are merely busy. They need people who can create results. People who can identify what matters. People who can make decisions. People who can take responsibility. People who can use their strengths. People who can make other people more effective. And if you develop those abilities, your value increases. Not because you worked yourself into exhaustion, but because your effort produces something meaningful. This is especially important in a world where information is becoming easier to access. Knowledge is everywhere. Tutorials are everywhere. Courses are everywhere. Books are everywhere. Artificial intelligence can provide answers in seconds. But having access to information doesn't automatically make someone valuable. The ability to decide what matters, apply knowledge, solve problems, and create useful results becomes even more important. In other words, the future doesn't simply belong to people who know the most. It increasingly belongs to people who can turn what they know into results. And that brings us back to you. What are you turning your knowledge into? What are you building? What problem are you solving? Who benefits from your work? What contribution are you making? Those questions are worth asking regularly. Because your answer today may not be the same as your answer 5 years from now. And that's perfectly fine. Your priorities can change. Your strengths can develop. Your responsibilities can evolve. Your definition of success can become clearer. The important thing is to remain conscious of the direction. Don't let your life become a collection of commitments you never intentionally chose. Don't let your calendar become a record of everyone else's priorities. Don't let your inbox decide what deserves your attention. And don't let busyness become your definition of success. You are allowed to choose. You are allowed to eliminate. You are allowed to change direction. You are allowed to protect your time. And you are allowed to decide that something which once mattered no longer deserves your energy. That freedom comes with responsibility. Because once you understand that you have choices, you can no longer blame every outcome on circumstances. You still won't control everything, but you become responsible for what you can control. Your attention, your effort, your decisions, your priorities, your learning, your response. And that is enough to make a remarkable difference. So tomorrow morning, don't begin by asking, "How much can I get done?" Begin with, "What matters most?" Find it. Give it your best attention. Then protect that attention. Do the work. When the result appears, examine it honestly. Did it work? Why? If it didn't, why not? What should change? Then make the next decision. That's the cycle. Choose, focus, act, learn, adjust, repeat. It sounds simple because the most powerful principles often are. But simple principles become powerful only when practiced. You don't become effective because you watched one video. You become effective because tomorrow you make one better decision. Then another the next day. Then another. Eventually, those decisions become habits. Those habits become patterns. And those patterns shape your results. Your results shape your reputation. Your reputation shapes your opportunities. And your opportunities shape the direction of your life. So don't underestimate the importance of what you do with the next hour. It may look small, but your future is built from small hours. A career is built from ordinary working days. A skill is built from ordinary practice sessions. A business is built from ordinary decisions. A relationship is built from ordinary conversations. A healthy body is built from ordinary choices. And an effective life is built from ordinary moments in which you decide what deserves your attention. That is perhaps the most important idea to remember. Your life doesn't suddenly become meaningful one day. You create meaning through what you repeatedly choose to do with your time. So if you're feeling overwhelmed right now, don't try to fix your entire life tonight. Choose one thing, one important thing. Remove one unnecessary commitment. Protect 1 hour. Develop one strength. Finish one meaningful task. Make one decision you've been avoiding. And learn from what happens. That is enough for today. Tomorrow, you can do it again. Because effectiveness isn't about becoming a machine that never rests. It is about becoming intentional enough to know when to work, when to stop, when to say yes, when to say no, when to continue, and when to change direction. It is about making your limited time count. And perhaps the greatest reward isn't that you get more done. It's that you spend less of your life doing things that don't matter. You have only so many days. Only so many mornings. Only so many evenings. Only so many opportunities to learn something new, build something meaningful, help someone, create something valuable, and become the person you want to be. You don't know exactly how many remain. None of us do, so don't waste them simply trying to appear productive. Use them deliberately. Choose your contribution. Build on your strengths. Protect your time. Concentrate on what matters. Make thoughtful decisions. Learn from reality. And have the courage to eliminate everything that keeps you from doing your best work. Because at the end of the day, the question isn't whether you were busy. The question isn't whether your calendar was full. The question isn't whether you answered every message. The question isn't even whether you worked harder than everyone else. The real question is much simpler. Did your effort create something that mattered? If the answer is yes, you are moving in the right direction. And if the answer is no, don't punish yourself. Learn. Change. Choose again. Tomorrow is another opportunity to direct your time more intelligently. Another opportunity to focus. Opportunity to contribute. Another opportunity to become more effective. And perhaps that's where the real power of these ideas lies. You don't need a completely different life. You need better choices inside the life you already have. So stop measuring your worth by how exhausted you feel at the end of the day. Measure it by the value you created. Stop trying to prove that you can handle everything. Start deciding what is actually worth handling. Stop chasing activity. Start pursuing results. And stop asking how to fit more into your life. Start asking what deserves to remain in it. Because your time is not just something you spend. Your time is your life. Spend it accordingly. This is Volume and Vision. If this video gave you a new way to think about your time, work, priorities, and personal growth, make sure to subscribe to Volume and Vision for more thoughtful ideas from powerful books that can help you work smarter, think clearer, and build a better life. And before you leave, remember one final thought. You don't need to do everything. You don't even need to do more. You need to do what matters. Do it well, learn from it, and keep moving forward. Because a truly effective life isn't the one that looks the busiest from the outside. It's the one where your limited time is being used for something that genuinely matters. Thank you for spending your time with Volume and Vision. Until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and most importantly, make your effort count.